Hey, Teddy K here for the Best Buy blog, and in this video review, we took a look at the Google Pixel 6a, Google's latest mid-range phone that offers a mix of older and newer components inside. The Pixel 6a is a sequel, and in more ways than one, particularly if you are in Canada because the 5a never came here. It had a limited release in the US and Japan. So if you're coming from, say, the 4a, or this is your first attempt at getting into a Google Pixel phone, this is the cheapest option right now that you can get into. And it mostly works. It's an interesting combination because the hardware to some degree is current. So it's running on Google's Tensor processor, the same one that's in the other Pixel 6 phones. But the camera hardware is not so new, and I'll get to that later. Somehow, though, this combination kind of works, and it works relatively well, too. When I look at a Google Pixel phone, especially one within the A series, I'm expecting efficiency. I'm expecting basically not the bells and whistles, just a phone that works, which is what a lot of people want. This does that. And that's why when I think about the looks and performance, I mean, the looks, we got a 6.1 OLED screen. It's nice, same resolution as the Pixel 6, although that one's a little bit bigger. The bezels are small, so this phone kind of feels small in hand, especially compared to some of the other big phones that are out there right now. So if you're looking for a smallish phone, this might, especially one with like a bigger screen, this might be right in your ballpark. Now, the performance side of things, I gotta touch on that because even though the design language is very familiar, of course, this is standard for a Pixel A device. It's just gonna fall in line with what some of the other devices are doing. Beyond that, I expected just basic performance. Now, you do get lower RAM, so the RAM is only 6 gigs. It's not a lot. So if you're multitasking, you'll notice that certain apps, not even certain apps, if you have a lot of apps open, some of the last apps that you had open will just close. And the reason is to save the RAM and ultimately keep the phone running properly, or at least smoothly, I should say. The internal storage at 128 gigs, standard. Again, obviously there's no way to expand on that unless you're using the cloud. So when it came to, the 60 hertz refresh rate too, I should mention that because for the screen, again, if you're a stickler for that sort of smoothness during navigation and you really notice it, you're gonna notice it on this phone too. I think for most people, I don't know that they'll tell the difference so much, or maybe they just get used to it. I think it's hard to say. But for me, I'm used to 120 hertz. I'm used to at least 90, if not above, usually 120. So I did notice it initially, but after a while, I kind of got used to it. So you might too. But it doesn't really affect performance overall. So if you want to use certain apps or whatever it is you want to do, whether it's messaging, social media, maybe you want to edit some photos, you want to stream content, whatever you want to do, the phone will do that pretty normally and pretty easily. I didn't really notice any major issues. In fact, even the fingerprint sensor, which has been a problem in the other Pixel 6 phones, I found it more efficient on this, and I know there's not a lot of consensus on that right now, particularly with the Pixel 6a. Some reviewers have said that they've noticed no difference. Some have said they've noticed a difference. I'm in the camp of where I have noticed a difference. It's not huge. It's not an exponential difference, but it's definitely more efficient than it was on the Pixel 6 Pro when I was testing it and as I've been using it. So with that in mind, I do want to get into battery life before I get into the camera. And the reason why is because the battery in here is not as big as you might think for a phone this size, 4,410 milliamps officially. That size shouldn't normally be an issue, but I don't know, battery life on this phone was interesting. In standby, I thought it was fine. It didn't really drain or sip very much, but there's a couple of caveats. So number one, if you're on a 5G network, 5G really does sap this battery. And this has been a noted issue with Google's phones where for whatever reason, they seem to drain a little faster, especially on 5G connectivity. So this one is no different. It does, on LTE it happens as well, but not the same way as it does on 5G. On Wi-Fi though, it's a dream. Just, it works really well. Battery doesn't drain quite as fast. More than that, the only other thing I'll say about the battery is that it's fine, but don't be surprised if you have to charge at the end of the night, every night. And in some cases, it might be earlier than others, depending on what it was you were doing. So if you're like streaming, I don't know, an entire, like 2 episodes, you're binging 2 episodes and, or you're watching something during a commute from work to or from work, those things will tax it over the course of a day. It really just depends on your usage. I can't quantify it exactly in each use cases because it varies so much. But what I would say is just don't expect impeccable battery life. It's probably not going to happen with this device. Now, speaking of impeccable, of course, the camera is always a factor when it comes to this phone, any Pixel phone. And you do have a dual lens setup in the back. There is no telephoto lens, not surprised. It's the main wide and ultra wide cameras that you get here. Here's the kicker though. The main camera is the same image sensor that was in the 5A, the 5, the 4A, the 4. I mean, basically going back all the way to the Pixel 3. Yes, it's the same image sensor. So the same 12.2 megapixel image sensor that was in all those phones. So why is Google recycling the same sensor from years ago? Well, because they can, and they feel that their software is good enough to make up for some of the shortfalls that come with an aged sensor like that. Do they do it? Well, I mean, I'll show you some photos that I've taken. You can be the judge. In my honest opinion, I think the photos are quite good. You can get very, very good shots with this camera, but then there are also times where I feel like the camera is lacking because, especially given what we've seen in the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, this feels like it's not in lockstep with those phones in any way. I'm not expecting necessarily that they put the exact same sensor, but they could have put something a little better than that. The ultra-wide camera is exactly the same as the 6 and 6 Pro, but that's not saying as much considering that was also the same image sensor that was in previous Pixel phones too. So again, a lot of familiarity under the hood on the camera side. And you'll notice some of that familiarity also when you're using the camera as well. The interface looks very similar. You do not get the motion modes that were introduced in the other Pixel 6 phones, but that's okay. There's always going to be something that's going to be cut out in order to get this into a budget price. The Magic Eraser feature that is in Google Photos but is exclusive to Pixel 6 phones is also back, and it works quite well. In fact, to the point where it will even suggest things to remove from a photo. I'm going to show you an example of that as I'm talking here, and you can see kind of how it works. It's pretty good. I'm impressed at how much ground it seems to have gotten since it was first introduced in the other Pixel 6 phones. It seems to be better at noticing noticing what it should remove, but you of course can choose manually. You don't have to go by what the AI is telling you to get rid of. Then there's camouflage. You'll notice that on the 6A, there's another feature next to Magic Eraser that's called camouflage. Now what camouflage does, it doesn't remove an element or an object from a photo, but it will change its color. So you may have a shot where, for example, you've taken something that is somewhat monochromatic, it's maybe monotone in color, there's not a huge variety of color in it, and then you've got this one object or this one thing that's in there that really kind of just draws attention away from the main subject, like a bright sign or something like that. So maybe you want to mute that, and this is the mode to do that. So you basically just sort of use your finger and just color over, just draw over the item that you want to camouflage, and you'll notice that it will change the color or the tone so that it better blends into the rest of the image. It's an interesting feature, and it works pretty well. I found that it's not as... You're not going to use it as much as Magic Eraser, I feel, but it is interesting that it's there, and interesting also that it's a Pixel 6a exclusive for now. I don't know how long that's going to be the case, but it is for now a Pixel 6a exclusive. The other Pixel 6 phones, for now, do not have that feature, although I do expect they will at some point. It just comes down to, is the Pixel 6a worth it? I would say yes, especially if you're upgrading from a 4a or an older Pixel, maybe even a 5. I could see the value in going to this, especially because the Tensor chip does different things than the previous chipsets of other older Pixel phones. So that's an advantage, I think, in that regard. The size, I think, is good. I think it's a nice combination in size. You'll definitely want to cover it with a case, though, because even though this feels like glass, it's not, but it feels fragile to me. So it looks nice. It's also a fingerprint magnet. Get a case. The IP67 rating is great too, so you have water resistance. That was not the case with the 4A and the earlier A series phones, so that's always a plus. If you end up dropping this in a pool or in a tub, not a problem. It won't die on you. And other than that, I mean, I think if you're willing to handle some of those trade-offs that I mentioned, particularly with the battery life, the connectivity, things like that, You'll be satisfied with this phone, and I'm curious to see what Google does when it updates the software as we go along as well. And that's my review of the Google Pixel 6a. For the Best Buy blog, I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.